thinking about this led me to think about a whole lot of ways in which we frame our identities, in which we choose the situations in which those identities become important to us, and we choose situations often in which they're not central to us. And certainly in my own life, if I look back over it, and unfortunately I'm reaching the age where that's about all I do, I hear laughs of appreciation from some of you in the room, thank you. But in my own life, being gay has been much more significant, I think, as a central part of my identity than being Jewish. I was talking to a friend of mine who's in a similar position, who was over at our place for dinner last night, and he said, but the big difference is you don't have to come out as Jewish to your family. They know. And I thought, that's right, that's very smart. On the other hand, I've also been in a number of situations where it's actually been easier to be gay than to be Jewish. And that's been my experience, particularly in times I've spent in Malaysia, where, for all sorts of reasons that we're all very aware of, there is a quite high level of, very ill-informed anti-Semitism, which is sort of all mixed up with anti-Israeli, pro-Palestinian position, but also the rather strange views of the world held by Dr. Mahathir, which have been passed on to a number of people in the Malaysian elite. But I was also struck, as I was listening earlier on to the wonderful tribute to your mother, and you were talking about the classic German culture and the references to Marx and Freud, made me remember the extent to which gays and homosexuals have often been lumped together by people on the right, often under the rubric of cosmopolitans. Cosmopolitanism has often in fact been used as a swear word by right-wing nationalists. And there is in fact, you were talking about German origins. My father's family came from Vienna, were part of a similar cultured, intellectual, Viennese Jewish aristocracy before everything collapsed at the end of the 30s. And there was actually a book by an American academic called Marty Bunzel, which talks about the strange symbiosis of gays and Jews in the history of Austria, and specifically the history, the cultural and social history of Vienna. It probably will be familiar to some of you in this room.
Dennis, come away from that statue.
Well, this is the modern visual effect. We did these things. So I don't want to use an after-dinner speech to talk at length about the complications of identity. I really just wanted to throw this out, and I throw it out very conscious of the fact that there is currently in the organised Jewish community a debate about the acceptance of a gay Jewish group, Aleph, into the community council. Now, I speak with some ignorance, less ignorance than when I came tonight, thanks to my hosts, but it's not something a debate I can talk about, except to note the irony of one community that is held together by such strong historical sense of persecution and discrimination, not being able to accept another community which in our lifetimes has felt the same sort of discrimination and persecution, very often from the same sources. What I actually did want to say a little bit about, more than that, is the role that I think we as left Australian Jews have in the debate on the future of Israel. Because my understanding is that is, in a sense, the origins of this society. And what binds us together, I think, is the sentence that Les read out. The recognition that if you are a Jew, and people know you're Jewish, as I've already pointed out, they don't always know that, you are immediately assumed to have certain positions vis-a-vis Israel. And this places upon us obligations both with other Jews, but I think more interestingly within Australia. My experience at the time of the Gaza conflict, beginning of this year, I wrote a piece for The Age, which was very critical of the Israeli government. And the opinion editor of The Age said they were thrilled because a non-Jew couldn't have got away with making those criticisms and not being attacked as anti-Semitic. Now, I think that's a very scary reflection of people's sophistication. But I think at the same time, it is also a recognition that we have to live with. That after all, if Israel defines itself as a Jewish state, then by extension, in some ways it speaks for all of us, whether we want it to or not. And sometimes, frankly, many of us would probably rather it didn't. But in the eyes of the rest of the world, it does. And this really leads me to what I think is a central political challenge for us. And I say us with the sense that in this room, however we may identify, whatever communities we may belong to, we probably share, in a broad sense, a common belief that the current Israeli path is one of, in the long term, huge danger to everyone living in Israel, as much, indeed, if not more, than it is to the Palestinians and the larger population of the Middle East. And I will say, I do feel some in a sense, it's like a desperate attempt. You have someone in the family who's behaving in ways that are self-destructive. Because in modern language we're then told to exercise tough love. You know, you lock up the liquor, you take away the car keys. In a sense, that's what I think we probably at some level all feel we need to do to Israel. Let's take away Benjamin Netanyahu's car keys, lock him up at home and beat some sense into him. But more seriously, I think the challenge for us in Australia is really to ask, why has Australia, and we all, I suspect, identify in ambivalent and ambiguous ways with Australia as much as we identify as being Jewish. Why has Australia adopted so strong a pro-Israeli position? Pro-Israeli in the sense of supporting whichever government is in power in Israel, not pro-Israeli in the broader sense of saying we support the existence of the State of Israel, which I think is a fairly unexceptional position to take. But it's gone far beyond that. And in fact, some of you who were with me in the Socialist Forum might well have shared my disappointment when our old colleague Julia Gillard, who was acting Prime Minister at the beginning of the year, expressed support for the Gaza attacks in language that was in fact much stronger than that used by the President and Secretary of State of the United States. And if we started thinking about what Australia might do that might actually contribute in a real way to bringing about a settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it seems to me that our starting point should be the possibility of Australia talking to those countries in our region who have adopted as hardline a position against Israel as our government seems to have adopted in favour of Israel. That is, it is in Australia's national interest, I think, as well as in the long-term interests of Israel, that we use our relations, particularly with those two very significant Muslim countries to our north, Indonesia and Malaysia, to start a new conversation about what peace in the Middle East would look like. And for us to do that, ironically, is of course totally consistent with what Kevin Rudd says our role in the world is. It is in fact a break from an automatic support of any American position. It is an attempt to reposition Australia as a middle-range power, but one in a part of the world where most governments, and increasingly most people, are very hostile to Israel, and where indeed the hostility to Israel, as my comments about Malaysia suggested, often do run into or shade into quite obvious anti-Semitism of a sort that really is on the whole, alien to us in this country.